Mark 14 verses 32 to 42. The cup. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough, the hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." If you've ever been on the receiving end of a prank, you may have been tricked into drinking something quite disgusting. For example, tea with vinegar, coffee with salt instead of sugar, or perhaps something worse than that. In verse 36 of Mark 14, Jesus refers to a cup far worse than any cup that you or I could ever imagine. He isn't tricked into drinking something from this cup, rather he receives this cup knowing that it will cause him to suffer. In the first half of verse 36, Jesus prays, "Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me." The cup that Jesus refers to isn't a physical cup, but it's symbolic of the pain and suffering which would fill him, far worse than drinking a cup full of poison. A cup so awful that Jesus tells his friends, Peter, James and John, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death." All of us at some point in our lives experience pain and grief, and we can feel as if God is unaware of our struggle. But here we see Jesus crushed with grief to the point of death. The Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus was praying, literally means the olive press. And it's here that Jesus was pressed and his soul crushed with grief to the point that he almost died before the beatings and the crucifixion. In keeping with this image of an olive press, we're told in Luke 22 verse 44 that as Jesus prayed in anguish in the garden, his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Scientists have identified this rare condition as hematidrosis, caused by extremely intense stress, usually in the face of death. So what caused Jesus to pray so desperately? And why did he ask the Father to take this cup of suffering away from him? Well, Jesus knew the prophecies in the Bible concerning the type of death he would suffer at the hands of the Romans. He knew that he would be beaten to within an inch of his life, that his closest friends would abandon him, one would betray him for a bag of silver coins, and that he would die a slow, agonizing death on a cross, his lungs slowly filling with blood. So the answer to the question, why did Jesus pray so desperately for God to take this cup away from him, seems obvious. But that's not all. It wasn't just the physical pain and betrayal of friends. There was something far worse in store for Jesus. He knew that although he himself was perfect and without sin, he was going to take on himself all the evil sin of the world. Just think about that for a moment. Every lie ever told by a man, woman or child, every evil thought, act of violence, murder and unspeakable evil ever committed throughout the existence of the world, all of this was going to be pinned on Jesus. He was blameless, and yet he chose to take this sin on himself, along with the full force of God's anger. It's not surprising that Jesus desperately prays, "Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me." Now, some people might say, yeah, okay, but the Bible tells us that Jesus was God, and God can handle anything. So it wasn't such a big deal for Jesus. Well, it was a big deal for Jesus. Yes, Jesus was fully God, but as hard as it is for our human brains to understand, Jesus was fully God, but he was also fully human. This was a huge ordeal for Jesus. I can't claim to know about your pain and struggles, but if you're ever in doubt that Jesus cares and that he can relate to your pain, just consider what he went through in Gethsemane for you. Jesus continues in verse 36 with 9 words that change the whole course of his life. 9 words which show Jesus' complete and unswerving devotion to God the Father, and which offer hope to you and me. He says, "Yet not what I will, but what you will." And why did Jesus say these words? Well, as I've said before, it was his unswerving devotion and love for God the Father. And it was also his love for you and me. God the Father sent Jesus to take the evil of the world upon himself, including yours and mine, so that we can be made right with God by trusting in his Son, Jesus. Jesus rightly asked the Father, "Is there another way? Do I really have to drink from this cup?" But he was willing to trust the Father to say, "Yet not what I will, but what you will." This Easter, perhaps you'll say to God, "I choose to put what I want to one side and to trust you, even if I face suffering and I don't understand why." Perhaps you've been a faithful church attender for years and tried to be a good person, but you know you've not made a decision to trust in Jesus, in his death and resurrection, taking your sin upon himself. Today is the day to say, "God, I choose to trust you and your plan to save me from all the wrong I've ever done. I choose to believe that Jesus died and came back to life so I can have eternal life through faith in him." Or maybe you have made that decision to make Jesus number one in your life, but like me, you often become over familiar with the head knowledge that Jesus died for my sin, to the point that it no longer touches your heart. Let us pause today to thank God for sending Jesus, who received the most awful cup of suffering on our behalf, and who God raised back to life so we can be forgiven and receive eternal life with him.